In the vast expanse of the Galactic Confederation, where 1,000 species bow to the might of their rulers, one truth has remained absolute for millennia: Deathworlders are the apex predators of the universe. Born on planets so hostile that merely surviving childhood marks them as warriors, these beings command fleets, topple empires, and bend reality to their will through sheer, terrifying determination. Princess Queen Zarathek has ruled the Zirian Empire for 3 centuries, her very name whispered in fear across star systems. She believes herself to be the last of the true Deathworlders, the final remnant of a dying breed in a galaxy grown soft and weak. Her iron fist has crushed rebellions, her strategic mind has outmaneuvered ancient civilizations, and her physical prowess has become the stuff of legends. But legends, as Zarathek is about to discover, have a way of walking among the living. When a single human vessel, battered, primitive, and impossibly small, refuses to surrender to her armada, the Princess Queen expects another easy conquest. What she finds instead will shatter everything she knows about strength, survival, and what it truly means to come from a world that breeds monsters. For humanity has been fighting its own war in the darkness between stars, and they've learned lessons that even a Deathworlder queen never imagined. The galaxy is about to witness what happens when 2 apex predators meet and discover they're not so different after all. The command deck of the Zirian dreadnought Crimson Sovereignty hummed with the quiet efficiency of a war machine that had never known defeat. Princess Queen Zarathek stood before the massive viewport, her 7-foot frame casting a shadow across the polished deck plating. Her forearms hung loose at her sides, but every officer present knew that those limbs could move faster than their eyes could track, and with enough force to crush steel. The Princess Queen's reputation preceded her wherever the Zirian armada traveled. 300 years of conquest had built an empire that spanned 47 star systems, and not once in all that time had she suffered a defeat. The creatures that served under her command came from dozens of species, but they all shared one common trait: absolute terror of their sovereign. Zarathek's homeworld of Zirian Prime was classified as a Class XII Deathworld, a designation so severe that only 12 such planets had ever been discovered in the known galaxy. The gravity was crushing, the atmosphere toxic to most life forms, and the indigenous predators had evolved specifically to hunt beings as dangerous as Zarathek herself. She had clawed her way to the top of that hellish food chain before her 15th birthday, and then turned her sights to the stars. "Your Majesty," came the trembling voice of her navigation officer, an insectoid being whose species had surrendered to the Zirian Empire rather than face extinction. "We've completed our jump to the Kepler Nebula. Long-range sensors are detecting the refugee fleet exactly where our intelligence indicated." Zarathek didn't turn from the viewport. She could smell the fear radiating from her crew, a scent that had become as familiar to her as her own breathing. "How many vessels?" "Preliminary scans show approximately 200 ships, Your Majesty. Mixed classes, mostly civilian transports and cargo haulers. No significant military presence detected." The Princess Queen allowed herself a small smile. Another world had fallen to rebellion against the Galactic Confederation's taxation policies, and its population had fled into the Outer Rim territories. Such refugees always carried valuable resources, and, more importantly, they provided excellent opportunities for Zarathek to demonstrate the consequences of defying established order. "Standard protocol," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had never needed to repeat an order. "Hail them and demand immediate surrender. Those who comply will be processed as indentured servants. Those who resist will serve as examples." The communications officer, a pale humanoid whose hands shook as he operated his console, opened a channel to the refugee fleet. "Attention, unidentified vessels. You have entered space claimed by the Zirian Empire. By order of Princess Queen Zarathek, you will power down your engines and prepare to be boarded. Any attempt at resistance will be met with immediate termination." On the tactical display, the refugee fleet's response was exactly what Zarathek had expected. The civilian vessels began cutting their engines and transmitting surrender codes, their crews no doubt paralyzed by the sight of the Zirian armada. 150 dreadnoughts, each one capable of cracking a planet's crust, had that effect on most rational beings. But, as Zarathek watched the display, she noticed something unusual. One vessel, smaller than the others and showing significant battle damage, had not acknowledged the surrender order. Instead, it was moving away from the main group, accelerating toward the outer system. "Target that vessel," the Princess Queen ordered.
Open a direct communication channel.
The bridge crew scrambled to comply, and, within moments, the main screen flickered to life. What Zarathek saw made her pause for the first time in decades. The being on the other end of the transmission was clearly from a species she had never encountered before. It was bipedal, roughly 6 feet tall, with pale skin and dark hair. But what caught her attention were its eyes. They held a hardness that Zarathek recognized immediately, the look of someone who had survived things that should have killed them. "This is Captain Sarachin of the UES Defiant," the being said, its voice steady despite facing impossible odds.
"I've heard of you, Princess Queen. Your reputation for butchering civilians has spread even to the Outer Rim."
Zarathek's officers gasped at the unprecedented disrespect, but the Princess Queen herself was intrigued. It had been so long since anyone had dared to speak to her without terror in their voice. "You are either very brave or very stupid, Captain Chen," Zarathek replied.
"I am curious to discover which."
"You will surrender immediately, or I will demonstrate why entire worlds flee at the mention of my name." Captain Chen's image remained steady on the screen. Behind her, Zarathek could see what appeared to be the vessel's bridge, and she was surprised by how primitive it looked compared to her own advanced technology. Yet the humans manning the station showed no signs of panic, working with the focused efficiency of experienced warriors.
"I've got a better idea," Chen said. "How about you turn around and find someone else to terrorize? These people have suffered enough." The bridge of the Crimson Sovereignty fell into stunned silence.
In 3 centuries of conquest, no one had ever responded to Zarathek's demands with such casual defiance. The Princess Queen felt something she had almost forgotten: genuine interest. "Fascinating," she murmured, her forearms crossing in a gesture that her crew knew meant someone was about to die in a particularly creative way. "Tell me, Captain Chen, what species are you? I pride myself on knowing every Deathworlder race in the galaxy, yet you are unfamiliar to me."
"Human," Chen replied without hesitation. "And, before you ask, yes, we're from a Deathworld."
Earth didn't get the memo that sentient life was supposed to evolve on garden worlds.
Zarathek's interest intensified.
She had never heard of this Earth, but if these humans were truly Deathworlders, it would explain their captain's lack of fear. Still, one small vessel against her entire armada was suicide, regardless of their world of origin. "How unfortunate that your species is about to become extinct," the Princess Queen said. "I will ensure that records of your defiance survive, as a warning to others." She gestured to her weapons officer, but, before the order could be given, Captain Chen's voice cut through the bridge once more.
"You know what the funny thing is about Deathworlders, Princess Queen? We don't like bullies."
The human captain's vessel suddenly accelerated, but not away from the Zirian fleet as expected. Instead, it turned directly toward Zarathek's flagship, moving far faster than its apparent technology should have allowed.
"Evasive maneuvers," Zarathek commanded, impressed despite herself by the human's audacity. "All weapons, target that ship."
The dreadnought's massive guns swiveled to track the incoming vessel, but the human ship moved with an unpredictability that confounded the targeting systems. It rolled, dove, and weaved through the incoming fire with movements that seemed to ignore basic physics.
"How is it moving like that?" demanded the tactical officer. "Its engine output doesn't support those maneuvers." Zarathek studied the display with growing fascination.
She had seen desperate final attacks before, but this was different. The human captain wasn't simply making a suicidal charge, she was demonstrating capabilities that shouldn't exist. The human vessel suddenly changed course again, this time heading directly for one of the Zirian dreadnoughts on the fleet's outer edge. What happened next defied every expectation Zarathek had formed about the primitive-looking ship. A beam of coherent energy, far more powerful than anything that small a vessel should have been able to generate, lanced out from the human ship's forward array. It struck the Zirian dreadnought's shields, and, to the absolute shock of everyone watching, those shields collapsed instantly.
"Impossible," breathed the tactical officer. "That ship's mass is less than 1% of a dreadnought's."
It shouldn't be able to generate enough power to. His words were cut off as the human ship fired again, this time directly into the dreadnought's exposed hull. The massive warship, which had participated in the conquest of 17 worlds, cracked down its entire length and exploded in a brilliant fireball.
The bridge of the Crimson Sovereignty erupted in chaos as officers struggled to process what they had just witnessed. A single human vessel had destroyed one of their most powerful warships in less than 30 seconds. Zarathek, however, felt something she had not experienced in over a century: genuine excitement. These humans were not merely another species to be conquered. They were something far more interesting. "All ships, converge on the human vessel," she ordered, her voice cutting through the panic around her. "I want it disabled, not destroyed. And prepare a boarding party." The Zirian fleet began to move with the coordinated precision of a pack of predators, but the human ship continued its impossible dance between their attacks. Every time it seemed cornered, Captain Chen would find another impossible maneuver, another burst of speed that physics said should have torn her ship apart. For 20 minutes, the single human vessel played a deadly game of cat and mouse with an entire armada. It destroyed 2 more dreadnoughts, crippled a half-dozen others, and somehow managed to avoid every attempt to disable it. Zarathek found herself genuinely impressed for the first time in decades. But even the most skilled pilot couldn't maintain such performance forever. As the human ship's maneuvers began to slow slightly, Zarathek's tactical officer finally managed to land a precision shot that overloaded the vessel's engines without destroying it completely. "Got them," the officer reported with satisfaction. "Their propulsion is offline, weapons are down. They're dead in space." Zarathek nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving the image of the drifting human ship. "Prepare my personal transport. I want to meet this Captain Chen face to face." "Your Majesty," her security chief protested, "meeting with unknown Deathworlders could be extremely dangerous. We should interrogate them remotely, or send a expendable boarding party." The Princess Queen turned to fix the security chief with a stare that had ended rebellions. "In 3 centuries of conquest, I have never encountered beings who could give my entire fleet a meaningful fight. These humans have earned the right to meet me personally." As the Zirian boarding shuttles launched toward the disabled human vessel, Zarathek found herself anticipating the encounter with something approaching enthusiasm. She had ruled through fear and superior force for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to face a genuine challenge. Soon, she would discover that meeting another apex predator was about to change everything she thought she knew about power, survival, and what it truly meant to be a Deathworlder in a galaxy full of prey species. The shuttle bay of the human vessel was smaller than any military ship Zarathek had ever seen, but, as her boarding party secured the area, she noticed details that spoke of sophisticated engineering hidden beneath the apparently primitive exterior. The bulkheads showed signs of emergency repairs, but the underlying structure was solid and well-designed. Captain Chen was waiting for them in what appeared to be the ship's small briefing room, flanked by 2 other humans who managed to look relaxed despite being outnumbered 50-1 by heavily armed Zirian troops. Zarathek studied the human captain carefully, noting the way she held herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had commanded in desperate situations. "Princess Queen Zarathek," Chen said, rising from her chair with what appeared to be genuine respect rather than fear. "I have to admit, I'm impressed. Your fleet's coordination was flawless. A lesser commander would have lost half their ships trying to disable us." Zarathek felt a flicker of something she couldn't quite identify. When was the last time someone had complimented her tactical skills rather than simply cowering before her reputation? "Your own performance was equally impressive, Captain Chen," the Princess Queen replied, settling her massive frame into the reinforced chair her security team had brought. "I have conquered 47 worlds, and never before have I seen a single vessel give my entire armada such difficulty. Tell me about your people." What followed was the most interesting conversation Zarathek had experienced in over a century. Captain Chen spoke of humanity's origins on a world that seemed to actively try to kill its inhabitants, of a species that had learned to survive by becoming persistence hunters, tool users, and pack coordinators. She described wars fought not for conquest but for survival, technologies developed not for dominance but for protection. "We've been fighting a war for the last 50 years, Chen explained. The hegemony found Earth and decided that humanity was too dangerous to be allowed to spread beyond our home system. They've been trying to exterminate us ever since." Zarathek leaned forward, intrigued. "The hegemony contacted you directly?" "They usually prefer to work through intermediaries. They made the mistake of demanding our surrender before demonstrating their power," Chen replied with a grim smile. Humans don't respond well to threats. We've been making them regret that decision ever since.
As the conversation continued, Zarathak began to understand something profound. These humans weren't just another Deathworlder species, they were apex predators who had been forged in a completely different crucible than her own people. Where Zarathak had learned to dominate through individual strength and fear, humanity had learned to survive through cooperation, adaptation, and what Captain Chen called spite.
You've been fighting a galactic power with primitive technology for 50 years? Zarathak asked, genuinely curious about how such a thing was possible.
Primitive is relative, Chen replied. We might not have antimatter cores or graviton manipulators, but we're very good at making things work when they shouldn't.
Human engineering has one principle: if it's stupid but it works, it's not stupid.
For the first time in centuries, Princess Queen Zarathak found herself facing a decision that couldn't be resolved through superior firepower. These humans represented something she had never encountered before: apex predators who fought not for conquest, but for survival. And, despite every tactical consideration that should have made her order their immediate execution, she found herself genuinely curious about what would happen next. The interrogation chamber aboard the Crimson Sovereignty had been designed to break the will of the strongest beings in the galaxy. Its walls were lined with neural disruptors, the gravity could be adjusted to crush most species, and the atmospheric composition could be altered to cause intense discomfort. Yet as Zarathak observed Captain Chen through the monitoring systems, the human woman appeared perfectly calm, even relaxed. For 3 days, the Princess Queen had attempted to understand these creatures called humans. Standard interrogation techniques had proven completely ineffective. The humans seemed to view torture as merely another environmental hazard to be endured, much like radiation or toxic atmosphere. They responded to threats with what could only be described as amusement, and attempts at psychological pressure were met with stories that made Zarathak's own experiences seem almost pleasant by comparison. Your Majesty, reported the interrogation specialist, a thin humanoid whose species had perfected the art of extracting information from unwilling subjects. The humans have proven remarkably resistant to standard techniques. Their pain tolerance exceeds that of most Deathworlder species, and their psychological profiles are unlike anything in our databases. Zarathak studied the reports with growing fascination. According to the analysis, humans possessed an unusual capacity for what their language called compartmentalization, the ability to function normally even under extreme stress. More intriguingly, they seemed to derive actual strength from adversity, becoming more determined rather than more compliant as conditions worsened. What have you learned about their technology? She asked. The specialist consulted his data pad nervously. Their vessel is a masterwork of adaptive engineering, Your Majesty. The hull plating is composed of materials we don't recognize, but our metallurgists believe it's some form of carbon composite that shouldn't be possible to manufacture without industrial facilities we know they don't possess. Zarathak's interest deepened. Continue. Their weapons systems appear to be based on focused particle acceleration, but they've achieved energy outputs that should require power cores 10 times larger than what their ship could accommodate. Our engineers are calling it impossible physics, but the evidence is undeniable. The Princess Queen rose from her command throne and made her way to the interrogation chamber. She needed to understand these humans herself, not through the filtered reports of subordinates who had never faced true adversity. Captain Chen looked up as Zarathak entered the chamber, and the human's expression shifted to what might have been mild interest. Princess Queen. I was wondering when you'd decide to have a real conversation. You consider this a conversation? Zarathak asked, settling into the reinforced chair across from the human. You are my prisoner, Captain Chen. Your ship is disabled, your crew is captured, and the refugee fleet you sought to protect is now under Zirian control. Chen shrugged, a gesture that somehow conveyed complete indifference to her circumstances. Temporary setbacks. The thing about humans is that we're really good at getting out of impossible situations. It's kind of our specialty. Zarathak studied the human's face, looking for signs of the bravado that most species displayed when trying to mask fear. What she found instead was something she recognized from her own mirror, the absolute certainty of someone who had never truly lost a fight that mattered. Tell me about the hegemony, the Princess Queen said. I am curious about any force capable of threatening Deathworlders. For the first time since the conversation began, Captain Chen's expression darkened.
The hegemony is what happens when a spacefaring civilization decides that diversity is a threat to be eliminated.
They've been systematically conquering or destroying any species that doesn't fit their definition of proper galactic citizens for the past 1,000 years.
And they consider humanity too dangerous to be allowed to survive?
They made that determination about 5 minutes after they detected our radio emissions, Chen replied with bitter amusement. Apparently, monitoring our entertainment broadcasts convinced them that we were a species of psychotic killers who needed to be contained or destroyed.
Zarathek couldn't help but smile at that. Were they wrong? Not entirely, Chen admitted. Humans are definitely capable of violence when threatened. But the hegemony made the same mistake that most galactic powers make when dealing with Deathworlders.
They assumed that because we're dangerous, we must also be aggressive.
This caught the Princess Queen's attention.
In her experience, Deathworlder species were invariably aggressive. It was what made them effective conquerors.
Explain.
Captain Chen leaned back in her chair, apparently unbothered by the neural disruptors humming around her.
Humanity spent most of its history fighting itself, Princess Queen. By the time we developed space travel, we'd learned some hard lessons about the cost of unchecked aggression.
We don't conquer for the sake of conquest. We fight when we're threatened, and we fight to win, but we don't go looking for fights we don't need.
Yet you attacked my fleet with a single ship.
I defended refugees from a bully, Chen corrected.
There's a difference. Humans have a cultural peculiarity when it comes to bullies. We tend to take it personally. Zarathek found herself genuinely intrigued by this perspective.
In her experience, strength was demonstrated through dominance, and dominance required the subjugation of the weak. The idea of a Deathworlder species that fought defensively rather than aggressively was almost incomprehensible.
Show me, she said suddenly. Chen raised an eyebrow. Show you what? Your ship. Your technology. Your capabilities.
I want to understand how a species with inferior technology has managed to survive against a galactic power for 50 years. The human captain considered this for a moment, then nodded.
On one condition.
You let me show you everything, not just what your engineers think they understand.
And you listen to what I have to say about the hegemony. Really listen.
Zarathek agreed, curious to see what the humans considered worthy of protection.
What she discovered over the following hours challenged everything she thought she knew about technological development and strategic thinking.
The human ship was indeed smaller and, apparently less sophisticated than Zirian vessels, but, as Captain Chen guided her through its systems, Zarathek began to understand the philosophy behind its design. Every component had been built with modularity and repairability in mind. Damage that would cripple most vessels could be worked around or compensated for through redundant systems and adaptive software. Human engineering starts with the assumption that everything will eventually break, Chen explained as they examined the vessel's power core. So we design things to fail gracefully and be fixed with whatever materials we have available. The power system itself was a revelation. Instead of the massive centralized cores favored by most spacefaring species, the human ship used dozens of smaller fusion reactors that could be reconfigured depending on operational requirements.
When the weapons needed more power, non-essential systems would automatically shut down their reactors and transfer the resources. When maximum speed was required, the entire ship's power grid could be temporarily reconfigured to boost the engines.
This level of system integration should be impossible, Zarathek observed.
The computational requirements alone would overwhelm any artificial intelligence I'm familiar with. Chen grinned. That's because we don't use AI for this.
Human crews learn to manage these systems manually, through training and experience. Every person on this ship can operate every system, because human survival has always depended on adaptability. As the tour continued, Zarathek began to understand that she was observing a completely different approach to survival than anything in her experience. Where Zirian technology focused on overwhelming force and individual superiority, human technology was designed around cooperation, adaptability, and persistence. The weapons systems were perhaps the most surprising aspect of the ship. Rather than the massive energy cannons favored by most military vessels, the human ship carried dozens of smaller weapons that could be rapidly reconfigured for different targets and situations. The particle beams that had destroyed her dreadnoughts were actually mining tools that had been adapted for military use, powered by a network of the ship's fusion reactors working in concert. "We call it MacGyvering," Chen explained when Zarathak asked about the improvised weapons systems. Named after an old entertainment character who was famous for solving problems with whatever materials he had available. "When the hegemony first attacked Earth, we didn't have military technology. We had mining equipment, construction tools, and a lot of very angry humans with engineering degrees." The refugee fleet that Zarathak had captured provided another lesson in human philosophy. Rather than the random collection of civilian vessels she had expected, the ships formed an integrated community. Each vessel specialized in different functions: manufacturing, agriculture, research, defense, but they were designed to support each other as a complete ecosystem. "Humans don't think in terms of individual survival," Chen explained as they observed the refugees being processed by Xerian troops. "We think in terms of community survival. Those people you've captured aren't just random refugees, they're geneticists, engineers, teachers, artists, farmers. They're a complete human colony, capable of rebuilding civilization wherever they settle." Zarathak studied the humans being led to the processing centers, noting the way they moved together, supported each other, and organized themselves even in captivity. It was unlike anything she had observed in other conquered populations. "You're not afraid," she realized suddenly. "None of you. You're angry, you're concerned for each other, but you're not actually afraid of me." Captain Chen met her eyes directly. "Fear is a luxury we can't afford, Princess Queen. Humans learned a long time ago that fear makes you stupid, and stupid gets you killed. We respect your strength, but fear? That's not something we do anymore." That evening, Zarathak found herself alone in her private chambers, reviewing everything she had learned about humanity. For 3 centuries, she had ruled through the simple principle that superior force guaranteed victory. The strong dominated the weak, the aggressive conquered the passive, and fear ensured obedience. But the humans had survived 50 years of warfare against a galactic power through principles that seemed to contradict everything she understood about strength. They fought defensively rather than aggressively. They prioritized community survival over individual dominance. They adapted and improvised rather than overwhelming their enemies through superior technology. Most disturbing of all, they had faced her legendary reputation with something approaching indifference. Not because they were suicidal or foolish, but because they genuinely didn't consider her a threat worth fearing. A chime from her communication system interrupted her thoughts. "Your Majesty," came the voice of her intelligence officer, "we've intercepted a transmission from the outer system. A hegemony fleet has just dropped out of hyperspace and is demanding that we surrender the human refugees to them immediately." Zarathak rose from her contemplation, sudden understanding flooding through her mind. The hegemony had followed the refugees to this system, and they wanted the humans badly enough to demand their surrender from the Xerian Empire itself. "How many ships?" she asked. 50 dreadnoughts, Princess Queen. The fleet is led by Grand Admiral Thexkar, and he's requesting immediate communication with you." For the first time in her long reign, Princess Queen Zarathak found herself facing a situation that couldn't be resolved through superior firepower alone. The hegemony was powerful enough to be a serious threat to her empire, but, more importantly, their presence here raised questions about everything Captain Chen had told her about humanity's war for survival. As she prepared to face whatever demands the hegemony would make, Zarathak realized that her encounter with humanity was about to become far more complicated than a simple conquest. These humans had survived 50 years of warfare for reasons she was only beginning to understand, and their enemies had just arrived to finish what they had started. The galaxy was about to witness what happened when apex predators were forced to choose sides. The main view screen of the Crimson Sovereignty displayed an image that made even Zarathak's veteran crew shift uncomfortably in their stations. Grand Admiral Thexkar of the hegemony was a towering figure even by the standards of his species, the Vortak. Standing nearly 9 feet tall, with forearms ending in razor-sharp claws and a head that resembled a predatory bird's skull, he embodied the hegemony's philosophy of dominance through superior evolution. "Princess Queen Zarathak," Thexkar said, his voice carrying the mechanical resonance of vocal implants designed to instill fear in lesser species.
Your reputation precedes you.
The hegemony respects the Xerian Empire's territorial claims, but we have urgent business regarding the human refugees you have captured.
Zarathek studied the hegemony fleet through her tactical displays.
50 dreadnoughts was a significant force, but not one that posed an immediate threat to her own armada. However, she was well aware that the hegemony's true power lay not in any single fleet, but in their vast network of subject worlds and client species. Grand Admiral, she replied, keeping her tone neutral. The Xerian Empire does not discuss the disposition of captured assets with foreign powers. These refugees are now property of my empire.
Thexkar's expression shifted in what might have been amusement. Princess Queen, I believe you may not fully understand what you have captured. These are not ordinary refugees.
They are humans, a species so dangerous that the hegemony has devoted considerable resources to their containment and eventual elimination.
I am aware of their species designation, Zarathek said carefully.
They appear to be standard Deathworlders, admittedly with some unusual technological capabilities.
Standard?
Thexkar's laugh was a harsh, grating sound.
Princess Queen, permit me to educate you about humanity.
50 years ago, we detected their radio emissions and dispatched a standard first contact fleet to bring them into the hegemony as client species. What we found was a world that had survived an extinction event that should have sterilized all life, populated by creatures that had not only survived but thrived in conditions that would kill most galactic species. The Grand Admiral gestured, and his communication system transmitted a data packet to Zarathek's ship.
These are the initial survey reports from Earth.
The planet's surface is 70% liquid water, a corrosive substance that most species can't even touch safely. The atmospheric pressure would crush beings from normal worlds, and the radiation levels from their star would cause genetic damage to most galactic citizens within days.
Zarathek reviewed the data with growing interest.
She had assumed that Earth was simply another high-gravity world like her own Xerian Prime, but the environmental readings were extraordinary even by Deathworlder standards. Furthermore, Thexkar continued, the planet hosts several thousand large predator species, many of which are specifically adapted to hunt humanoid prey. Yet humans not only survived in this environment, they became the dominant species and developed technology that allowed them to leave their world. Impressive, Zarathek acknowledged, but hardly unprecedented.
Many Deathworlder species have similar origins. That is where you are mistaken, Princess Queen.
What makes humans truly dangerous is not their individual capabilities, but their social structure. Most Deathworlder species are apex predators, they dominate through individual strength and natural weapons.
Humans are pack hunters.
They evolved to work together, to share information, and to solve problems cooperatively. The tactical display showed the hegemony fleet maintaining a respectful distance, but Zarathek could see that they had arranged themselves in a formation that would allow rapid deployment if negotiations failed.
When we first contacted humanity, Thexkar said, we offered them the standard client species agreement.
Technological assistance in exchange for adherence to hegemony law and policy. They refused, claiming that they preferred to develop on their own terms.
Zarathek could understand such a response.
Many proud species rejected client status in favor of independence, though few had the strength to maintain that independence for long. We then demonstrated our superior technology by disabling their orbital installations, the Grand Admiral continued. We expected immediate surrender, as we had received from every other species we had contacted.
Instead, the humans declared war.
A poor decision for a primitive species, Zarathek observed.
So we believed.
Our initial assault fleet consisted of 20 dreadnoughts, more than sufficient to conquer most star systems.
The humans destroyed 18 of them. This caught Zarathek's full attention.
20 hegemony dreadnoughts represented a significant military force, one that should have been able to overwhelm any single world's defenses.
How? She asked.
Improvisation, adaptation, and what their language terms spite, Thexkar replied with obvious distaste. They converted mining equipment into weapons, turned industrial facilities into shipyards, and somehow managed to coordinate their entire planet's response within hours of our arrival. Every human on their world became a soldier, engineer, or support specialist overnight.
The Grand Admiral's expression darkened as he continued his account. But that was merely the beginning. Over the next 50 years, humanity has proven to be the most persistent and adaptable enemy we have ever faced. They don't fight to conquer territory, they fight to survive, which makes them infinitely more dangerous. Zarathek was beginning to understand why the hegemony considered humanity such a significant threat.
A species that could coordinate its entire population for warfare, that could improvise effective weapons from industrial equipment, and that refused to surrender even when facing overwhelming odds would indeed be a formidable enemy. They have no fixed military infrastructure that can be targeted, Thexkar explained. Their fleets consist of converted civilian vessels that can be built in any system with basic industrial facilities. Their crews are trained to operate every system on their ships, so battle damage that would cripple other vessels merely forces them to adapt their tactics.
And their strategy?
They flee when they must, fight when they can, and learn from every encounter. Over 50 years, they have developed countermeasures for every weapon we deploy, tactics to defeat every strategy we attempt, and technologies that shouldn't be possible with their resource base. The communication was interrupted by an urgent alert from Zarathek's tactical officer. Your Majesty, we're detecting massive energy signatures from the human ship. They appear to be attempting to restart their engines. Zarathek switched her attention to the internal monitors showing the human vessel in her fleet's custody. Through the viewports, she could see figures moving with purpose through the ship's corridors, and several of the supposedly disabled systems were showing signs of power restoration. Impossible, she muttered. My engineers assured me their propulsion systems were completely destroyed. Nothing is ever completely destroyed where humans are concerned, Thexkar observed with what sounded like bitter experience. They have an extraordinary talent for making broken things work again. As if summoned by their conversation, Captain Chen's voice suddenly crackled through the communication system.
Princess Queen, this is Captain Chen.
I thought you should know that my crew has just finished repairing our primary systems.
We'll be ready to depart in approximately 10 minutes.
Zarathek's security chief immediately began issuing orders to increase the guard presence around the human ship, but Chen's voice continued with what sounded like amusement.
I wouldn't bother with additional security, Princess Queen. If we wanted to fight our way out, we would have done it already. Instead, I have a proposition for you. Speak, Zarathek commanded, genuinely curious about what the human captain had in mind. The hegemony followed us here because they want to complete their genocide against humanity.
They'll demand that you turn us over to them, probably with some threat about the consequences of harboring dangerous fugitives.
Zarathek glanced at Grand Admiral Thexkar's image, noting the Vortak leader's obvious displeasure at Chen's accurate assessment of the situation. Here's what I propose, Chen continued. Give me and my crew 12 hours to demonstrate why humanity has survived 50 years of warfare against overwhelming odds. If we can't convince you that we're worth protecting, we'll surrender ourselves to the hegemony willingly. And if you succeed in this demonstration,
then you'll understand why the hegemony is so desperate to destroy us, and maybe you'll decide that having humans as allies is more valuable than having them as enemies.
Thexkar's image flickered as he apparently attempted to override the communication channel. Princess Queen, I must advise against any arrangement with these humans.
They are masters of manipulation and deception. Whatever they promise you, their ultimate goal is escape and the continuation of their terrorist campaign against galactic civilization.
Zarathek considered the competing claims. On one hand, the hegemony was a known quantity, a powerful force that she had no desire to antagonize unnecessarily.
On the other hand, humanity represented something she had never encountered before, a species that might actually be more dangerous than her own.
What form would this demonstration take, Captain Chen?
There's a hegemony listening post in this system, Chen replied. Heavily fortified, automated defenses, probably a garrison of a few hundred troops. Your fleet could crack it eventually, but it would cost you ships and crew.
Zarathek's tactical officer quickly confirmed the existence of the installation.
It was a standard hegemony intelligence facility, designed to monitor traffic through the system and report back to their regional command.
My crew and I will take it, Chen said simply.
One ship, one crew, 12 hours. We'll capture the facility intact, along with all personnel and intelligence data.
Impossible, Thexkar interjected.
That installation was designed to withstand assault by entire fleets. No single ship could. We're not talking about a conventional assault, Grand Admiral, Chen interrupted with obvious satisfaction.
We're talking about a human solution to the problem. Zarathek found herself genuinely intrigued by the proposal.
If the humans could actually capture a hegemony installation with a single damaged ship, it would be a demonstration of capabilities that exceeded anything in her experience. If they failed, she could turn them over to Thexkar with clear conscience.
Very well, Captain Chen. You have 12 hours.
But understand that if you attempt to escape during this demonstration, I will personally hunt you down and make your deaths appropriately memorable.
Understood, Princess Queen. We'll try to keep the entertainment value high.
As the communication ended, Zarathek settled back in her command throne to observe what would happen next. For the first time in decades, she was about to witness a combat operation that she couldn't predict the outcome of.
Grand Admiral Thexkar's expression showed his obvious displeasure with the arrangement. Princess Queen, you are making a serious error. Humans are not to be trusted under any circumstances.
Perhaps, Zarathek replied. But, I am curious to see what makes them so dangerous that the mighty hegemony has spent 50 years trying to destroy them. As the human ship powered up its engines and began moving toward the hegemony listening post, Zarathek realized that she was about to learn something important about the nature of strength, survival, and what it truly meant to be an apex predator in a galaxy full of competitors. The next 12 hours would determine whether humanity deserved her protection or her participation in their destruction. The hegemony listening post designated Station Kappa 7 hung in the shadow of a massive asteroid, its sensors and communication arrays extending like metallic tentacles into space. From Zarathek's position aboard the Crimson Sovereignty, the installation appeared to be exactly what Grand Admiral Thexkar had described, a heavily fortified intelligence facility designed to withstand prolonged assault.
Tactical analysis complete, Your Majesty, reported her weapons officer. The station's shields could absorb sustained fire from at least 20 of our dreadnoughts. Its point defense systems would make fighter attacks suicidal, and the garrison appears to be reinforced with automated defense platforms. Zarathek studied the tactical display with professional interest.
Station Kappa 7 represented the kind of target that would require careful planning and significant resources to capture intact. A conventional assault would likely succeed, but at the cost of several ships and hundreds of crew members.
Distance to target, she asked.
The human vessel is now approximately 1 million kilometers from the station and approaching its standard cruising speed.
At current velocity, they will reach weapons range in 47 minutes.
Grand Admiral Thexkar's image flickered onto the communication screen, his expression showing the mixture of anticipation and contempt that Zarathek was beginning to associate with his species' attitude toward humanity.
Princess Queen, he said, I hope you are prepared to witness the futility of human tactics against proper military engineering. Station Kappa 7 has never been successfully attacked by any force smaller than a full battle fleet.
We shall see, Zarathek replied, though privately she was beginning to wonder if Captain Chen had made a promise she couldn't keep. The human ship had shown remarkable capabilities in their previous encounter, but this was an entirely different category of challenge. As the human vessel approached the station, Zarathek expected to see the opening moves of a conventional assault, long-range weapons fire, attempts to probe the station's defenses, or perhaps some form of electronic warfare. Instead, Captain Chen's ship simply continued its steady approach, making no aggressive moves whatsoever. They're hailing the station, reported the communications officer with obvious surprise.
Audio only, or full communication? Full communication, Your Majesty. The humans appear to be requesting permission to dock for emergency repairs. Zarathek felt a flicker of admiration for the audacity of the approach. Rather than attacking the station, the humans were attempting to gain entry through deception. It was a clever tactic, though she doubted the hegemony garrison would be fooled by such an obvious ploy. The station's response came within minutes, broadcast on standard emergency frequencies. Unknown vessel, this is Hegemony Station Kappa 7. You are approaching a restricted military installation. Alter course immediately or you will be fired upon.
Captain Chen's voice replied with exactly the right mixture of desperation and relief.
Station Kappa 7, this is the independent freighter Lucky Strike. We've suffered catastrophic engine failure and our life support is failing. Request emergency docking for humanitarian assistance.
There was a pause before the station responded. Freighter Lucky Strike, transmit your registry codes and cargo manifest for verification. Transmitting now, Chen replied, and Zarathek watched as the human ship broadcast what appeared to be legitimate identification codes for a civilian vessel. Grand Admiral Thexkar's expression shifted to confusion as he monitored the exchange. How do they have valid registry codes? Those identification numbers correspond to an actual freighter that was destroyed in combat 6 months ago. Zarathek was beginning to understand the sophistication of the human approach. This wasn't simply a matter of pretending to be someone else, they had somehow acquired genuine documentation for a vessel that no longer existed. The station's response showed that their security checks had apparently been satisfied. Freighter Lucky Strike, you are cleared for emergency docking at Bay 7. Reduce speed and follow the guidance beacons. As the human ship adjusted course toward the station's docking facility, Zarathek realized that she was witnessing something more complex than simple deception. The humans had somehow anticipated this exact situation and prepared accordingly. How did they obtain those registry codes? She asked her intelligence officer. Unknown, Your Majesty. The codes appear to be authentic, but the vessel they belonged to was confirmed destroyed by hegemony forces during a routine patrol action. There should be no way for anyone to access those files. The answer came to Zarathek with sudden clarity. Somehow, the humans had access to hegemony databases. Whether through infiltration, electronic warfare, or some other method, they had gathered intelligence that allowed them to impersonate destroyed vessels. Over the next hour, Zarathek watched as the human ship docked with the station and apparently underwent standard emergency assistance protocols. Through passive sensors, her crew was able to monitor the station's internal communications, and everything appeared to be proceeding normally. Station personnel report that the freighter crew consists of 5 beings requiring minor medical attention and standard life support replenishment, her communications officer reported. The station commander has authorized a 6-hour layover for repairs. Grand Admiral Thexkar's confusion was evident. This makes no sense. Human tactics typically involve direct confrontation or guerrilla warfare. This level of subterfuge is not consistent with their known operational methods. Zarathek was beginning to suspect that the Grand Admiral's understanding of human capabilities might be somewhat limited. How long have you been personally involved in the war against humanity? I assumed command of the containment operations 15 years ago, Thexkar replied. During that time, I have studied every human engagement in our databases. And, in those 15 years, how many times have humans attempted this type of infiltration operation? There was a long pause before the Grand Admiral replied. Never. Human tactics typically focus on direct assault using improvised weapons and unconventional strategies. This type of sophisticated deception is not part of their documented behavioral patterns. The realization hit Zarathek like a physical blow. Grand Admiral, I believe you have made a serious error in your assessment of human capabilities. What do you mean? You have been fighting humanity for 50 years, but you have only been seeing the tactics they chose to show you. This infiltration demonstrates capabilities that they have kept hidden throughout your entire conflict. Before Thexkar could respond, alarms began sounding aboard both the Crimson Sovereignty and the Hegemony Fleet. Station Kappa 7's communication systems had suddenly gone silent, and its defensive systems were powering down in sequence. What is happening? Thexkar demanded. Zarathek's tactical officer provided the answer with obvious admiration in his voice. The station's command center has been captured, Your Majesty. All primary systems are shutting down, and we're detecting what appears to be systematic data extraction from the station's computer cores. Impossible, the Grand Admiral protested. The station has a garrison of 300 troops, automated security systems, and multiple redundant command centers. 5 humans cannot possibly. His words were cut off as Captain Chen's voice emerged from the station's communication system. Princess Queen Zarathek, this is Captain Chen reporting from Station Kappa 7's primary command center. The installation is now under human control, with all personnel captured and all intelligence assets secured.
The elapsed time from docking to capture had been exactly 93 minutes. How? Zarathek asked, genuinely impressed by the feat. Human engineering principle number 1, Chen replied with obvious satisfaction. Every system has multiple failure points, and every failure point is also an opportunity. The hegemony designed this station to resist external assault, but they didn't consider the possibility of systematic internal sabotage. Over the following hours, as Zarathek's technical teams examined the captured station, the full scope of the human operation became clear. Captain Chen's crew had not simply overpowered the garrison through superior force. Instead, they had systematically disabled every security system, isolated every defensive position, and captured the entire facility through a combination of technical expertise and psychological manipulation. They introduced a computer virus into the station's systems during the docking procedure, Zarathek's chief engineer reported. The virus was designed to gradually disable security protocols while maintaining the appearance of normal operation. By the time the garrison realized they were under attack, their own systems were working against them. The psychological aspect was even more impressive. Rather than using violence to subdue the station's crew, the humans had convinced most of the garrison that they were experiencing a system-wide technical failure. Isolated groups of defenders had surrendered when presented with what appeared to be overwhelming evidence that their position was hopeless. Total casualties? Zarathek asked. None, Your Majesty. All 300 garrison personnel were captured alive and unharmed. The humans appear to have used non-lethal methods exclusively. Grand Admiral Thexkar's fleet had maintained its position throughout the operation, but Zarathek could see the impact of the human success on his demeanor. The confident contempt had been replaced by something approaching concern. Princess Queen, Thexkar said, this demonstration changes nothing. Humans remain a threat to galactic stability, regardless of their tactical capabilities. On the contrary, Zarathek replied, this demonstration has been quite educational. Tell me, Grand Admiral, in 50 years of warfare against humanity, how many times have your forces captured intact human installations? The pause before his answer was telling. Human tactics typically involve the destruction of their own facilities rather than allow them to be captured. And how many times have you successfully interrogated human prisoners? Humans typically choose death over surrender. Zarathek nodded slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. Yet in the space of a few hours, Captain Chen's crew captured an entire hegemony installation without killing anyone, and they have now provided me with access to hundreds of your personnel for interrogation. The implications were staggering. The humans had not simply captured a military installation, they had demonstrated capabilities that exceeded anything in Zarathek's experience. More importantly, they had shown mercy toward defeated enemies, something that was almost unheard of in her galaxy. Captain Chen, she called through the communication system, I believe our agreement called for you to convince me that humanity is worth protecting. You have succeeded in that goal. The question now is what happens next? Chen's response came immediately. That depends on what you learned from the station's database, Princess Queen. I think you'll find the hegemony's records quite educational. As Zarathek's intelligence teams began analyzing the captured data, she realized that her understanding of the conflict between humanity and the hegemony was about to undergo another fundamental revision. The information contained in Station Kappa 7's computers would reveal truths that would change everything she thought she knew about galactic politics, the nature of warfare, and what it truly meant to be strong in a universe full of predators. The humans had passed her test, but, more importantly, they had demonstrated that strength didn't always require dominance, and that victory didn't always require the destruction of one's enemies. For a Deathworlder queen who had built an empire through fear and superior force, these were concepts that challenged the very foundation of everything she believed. The data cores from Station Kappa 7 painted a picture of the galaxy that Zarathek had never imagined. For 3 days, her intelligence teams had worked through terabytes of classified hegemony information, and what they found challenged everything she thought she knew about galactic politics and the true nature of the conflict between humanity and the hegemony. Your Majesty, her chief intelligence officer reported, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had discovered something profound and disturbing. The hegemony's own records confirm that humanity has never initiated aggressive action against any species other than in direct self-defense. Zarathek studied the compiled reports from her position on the command throne.
Around her, the bridge crew worked with the focused efficiency of beings who understood they were processing information that could reshape their understanding of the galaxy. Furthermore, the intelligence officer continued, the records indicate that the hegemony's claims about human aggression are deliberately fabricated. They have systematically destroyed evidence of human peaceful overtures and suppressed information about successful diplomatic contacts. Grand Admiral Thexkar's image flickered onto the main screen, his expression showing the controlled anger of someone whose carefully constructed narrative was being dismantled piece by piece.
Princess Queen, I protest this violation of hegemony sovereignty.
Those records are classified military intelligence, obtained through illegal means.
The legality of the acquisition is irrelevant, Zarathek replied coldly. What matters is the accuracy of the information.
Tell me, Grand Admiral, why do your own records indicate that humanity has repeatedly attempted to negotiate peaceful coexistence?
Thexkar's silence stretched for long moments before he replied. Human offers of negotiation are deceptive tactics designed to gain strategic advantage.
They cannot be trusted to honor any agreement. Yet according to these records, Zarathek's intelligence officer interjected, humans have honored every ceasefire agreement they have signed, even when doing so placed them at tactical disadvantage. It is the hegemony forces that have consistently violated these agreements. Captain Chen's voice joined the conversation from the captured station. Princess Queen, now that you've seen the hegemony's own records, perhaps you'd like to hear the human perspective on this conflict. Zarathek authorized the communication link, genuinely curious to hear how humanity would explain 50 years of warfare against overwhelming odds. The war began, Chen said, when the hegemony demanded that humanity submit to what they called guided evolution. According to their proposal, humans would be relocated from Earth to controlled environments where our dangerous tendencies could be managed through genetic modification and cultural conditioning. Guided evolution, Zarathek repeated, looking at the hegemony data. I see no reference to this policy in your official records, Grand Admiral. Thexkar's expression hardened. The offer was made for their own protection and that of other galactic species.
Humans pose an inherent threat due to their psychological instability and violent tendencies. What psychological instability? Chen asked with obvious amusement. The fact that we refuse to abandon our homeworld and submit to genetic modification? The fact that we insisted on maintaining our cultural identity?
As the conversation continued, Zarathek began to understand the true nature of the conflict. The hegemony hadn't simply contacted humanity and been rebuffed, they had demanded the complete transformation of human civilization as the price of being allowed to exist. Show me the original contact protocols, she ordered her intelligence teams. The records were damning. The hegemony's first contact with humanity had been preceded by months of surveillance and analysis, culminating in a demand that humans submit to corrective measures designed to make them more compatible with galactic civilization.
When humanity refused, the hegemony had declared them a threat to galactic stability and authorized their elimination.
50 years, Zarathek said slowly, 50 years of warfare because humanity refused to allow you to change them into something else.
Humans are Deathworlders, Thexkar insisted.
Their natural aggression and unpredictability make them unsuitable for civilized society.
Left unchecked, they would become a threat to every peaceful species in the galaxy. Like me?
Zarathek asked with dangerous quiet. The Grand Admiral's pause was telling. The Zirian Empire has proven itself capable of maintaining civilized standards of conduct. Your conquests follow established protocols of warfare and occupation.
Zarathek's laugh was cold and bitter.
Grand Admiral, I have personally overseen the destruction of 17 worlds and the enslavement of their populations. My empire is built on the principle that the strong dominate the weak, and fear ensures obedience.
Yet you consider me more civilized than humans who have never conquered a single world?
The truth was becoming impossible to ignore. The hegemony's definition of civilized behavior apparently allowed for conquest, enslavement, and genocide, as long as they were conducted according to established protocols. But humans, who fought only in self-defense and showed mercy to defeated enemies, were considered too dangerous to be allowed to exist.
Captain Chen, Zarathek called, what does humanity want from this galaxy? Chen's answer came without hesitation.
To be left alone to develop according to our own choices. We never asked to be part of galactic civilization, and we've never sought to impose our values on anyone else.
We just want the right to exist as we are. And, if you were given that right? If the war ended tomorrow and humanity was guaranteed safety from hegemony interference? We'd go back to doing what we were doing before this all started. Exploring, learning, growing as a species. Maybe eventually we'd be ready to join galactic civilization on equal terms, but that should be our choice to make. Zarathek found herself facing a decision that would define not just her own future, but the future of her empire and, possibly, the galaxy itself. The humans represented something she had never encountered, a Deathworlder species that sought cooperation rather than domination, that valued freedom over security, and that would rather die fighting than live in subjugation. More importantly, they had demonstrated capabilities that made them valuable as allies and dangerous as enemies. Their capture of Station Kappa 7 had shown tactical and technical abilities that exceeded her own forces in several key areas. Their 50-year survival against overwhelming odds proved their strategic competence and determination. But allying with humanity would mean opposing the hegemony, and that would bring consequences that could threaten everything she had built. Grand Admiral, she said finally, withdraw your fleet from this system. The refugees under my protection will not be surrendered to you. Thexgar's expression shifted to open hostility. Princess Queen, you are making a grave error. The Hegemony Council will not tolerate interference in the containment of the human threat. This decision will have consequences for your empire. I am certain it will, Zarathek replied. But I have learned something important in my dealings with humanity. Strength is not always measured by the ability to destroy. Sometimes it is measured by the wisdom to choose which battles are worth fighting. She terminated the communication with the Grand Admiral and opened a direct channel to Captain Chen. Captain, I believe it is time for a more comprehensive discussion about the future relationship between humanity and the Zirian Empire. Over the following hours, Zarathek found herself engaged in negotiations unlike any in her 3-century reign. Rather than dictating terms to a conquered enemy, she was exploring the possibility of an alliance between equals. The humans wanted protection for their refugee populations and assistance in finding suitable worlds for colonization. In exchange, they offered technological cooperation and military assistance. We're not asking you to fight our war for us, Chen explained. We're asking for the chance to fight it alongside you, if the hegemony forces the issue. Zarathek considered the implications. An alliance with humanity would provide her empire with access to technologies and tactics that could give her significant advantages over her rivals. But, more importantly, it would represent a fundamental change in how she viewed strength and power. For 3 centuries, she had ruled through fear, dominating the weak and destroying those who opposed her. The humans offered a different model, cooperation based on mutual respect and shared interests. It was a concept that challenged everything she had believed about leadership and survival. There is something I must understand, she said to Chen. Your people have survived 50 years of warfare through cooperation, adaptation, and what you call spite. But those qualities alone cannot account for your success against a galactic power. What else makes humanity so dangerous that the hegemony fears you enough to attempt genocide? Chen's smile was visible even through the communication link. Princess Queen, the thing that makes humans truly dangerous is something that no amount of military analysis can quantify. We're stubborn. Not just individually, but as a species. When someone tells us we can't do something, especially when they're trying to force us to change into something we're not, we take it as a personal challenge. You fight because you refuse to surrender? We fight because the alternative is becoming something we're not. The hegemony doesn't just want to kill us, Princess Queen. They want to transform us into compliant citizens of their perfect galactic order. And humans would rather die than become something that isn't human. Zarathek understood. The humans weren't fighting for territory, resources, or dominance. They were fighting for the right to remain themselves, unchanged and uncompromised. It was a motivation that transcended mere survival, and it explained their persistence in the face of seemingly hopeless odds. Very well, she said finally. The Zirian Empire will provide sanctuary for human refugees and protection from hegemony interference.
In exchange, humanity will share their technologies and tactical innovations, and will provide military assistance if the hegemony attempts to retaliate.
The alliance that followed would reshape the balance of power in the galaxy.
Two apex predator species, each powerful in their own way, combining their strengths in pursuit of goals that neither could achieve alone. The hegemony would discover that their perfect galactic order faced opposition from sources they had never anticipated. But, more importantly, Princess Queen Zarathek had learned that true strength lay not in the ability to dominate others, but in the wisdom to choose worthy allies and the courage to stand by principles worth defending. The galaxy would never be the same, and, for the first time in centuries, that change represented hope rather than conquest. As she watched the human refugee fleet prepare to accompany her armada to their new homes within Zirian space, Zarathek realized that she was no longer the only Deathworlder queen in the galaxy. She had found something better. She had found equals worthy of respect, and allies worthy of trust. The stars themselves seemed to shine brighter with the promise of what such an alliance might accomplish.